Greetings, my name is Slight, and this is my all-scroll Gunfire Reborn solo Reincarnation 7 tier list. It is a monster, and we are going to be moving through it today. To be clear, this list will work for lower difficulty play. You may just not have all of these scrolls unlocked quite yet. If you're just looking for a high-level tier list to use during your play, please feel free to pause the video. I don't like hiding that tier list at the end of the video. It is right here, ready for you to use. What I'm going to be doing is going through each of these scrolls from the bottom up, showing the wiki page on the right-hand side, and that's going to be very useful for you guys, and you can kind of follow along as I explain why I've ordered it this way. Speaking of ordering it this way, it's important that we talk about how I chose to order this, okay? There's a couple schools of thoughts. You can do a tier list for the scrolls based on the average case for all heroes. So if you assume that like all heroes in all situations got it, how good is it on average? You can do it for like the best case scenario. So like, you know, if you pick it on the perfect hero at the perfect time and the perfect build, how good is it? You know, and you can order them like that. Or you can do what I've done, which is sort of a half measure. What I'm trying to do is rate these based on their average use, not in their optimal situation, but when they're picked reasonably. All right. So if you're, even if you're a new player, you know, you probably have a sense of what skill damage is. It's the damage that your skills do. So if nothing that you're doing is doing skill damage, then picking a skill damage scroll would be obviously very, very weak in that build. And so I'm going to rely on you to be able to sort that out on your own. I'm going to be going through the entire tier list here from the bottom to the top. I'm going to go through and have the wiki page on the right, and I'll have timestamps for each section here, which are the sections here, in the YouTube timeline bar, whatever it's called. Hopefully this is helpful. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my choices or the reasons that I think these are good. I make these to help the community, so I make it a point to respond to all questions. So please ask questions. Without further ado, let's get started. The first category we're going to be looking at is very situational. This does not mean it is the worst category. What I mean is that these are some of the most highly situationally useful scrolls in the game. And so because of that, I don't think they really fit into the normal like archetype of how you would put together a tier list. So we're going to go through what these are, when they're good, when they're not good real quick. First up is Deflection Shield. Deflection Shield says minus 90 damage when enemies are 15 meters away, but plus 90 when they're within range. This is okay overall. I'd say that there are times when you can really abuse this, and it's very, very good. But 15 meters, especially early, is really hard to keep enemies away from. This is definitely worst in the Longling Tomb. But the longer the game goes on, the more you're able to kite, the more movement speed you have, the better the scroll is. Next up, we've got Fire Enthusiast. Fire Enthusiast says whenever you inflict burning effect on enemies, you also inflict it on yourself. You take continuous damage, which right now is 5 damage per second. When you are burning, you get 2% lifesteal from fire damage. This is probably the better lifesteal in the game right now because the downside of burning applied to yourself is not quite so bad as the downside of Sanguine Relic, which we can get to here in just a bit. Also, Fire Enthusiast has a great synergy with Deadly Counter, where you are constantly hurting yourself, which makes all of your attacks turn out to be crits. So a pretty good scroll, very situational. Realistically, it's only great on the dog because he has a lot of health, or if you're running this particular scroll right here. Next up, we have Berserk Soul. Berserk Soul says plus 0.5% lucky shot for each 1% health missing. The maximum effect here is plus 49.5% when at 1% health. And then I think it's based just on health, so it's not based on your shields or armor. This is okay. Once again, it's really only good if you're actually low on HP. So this is a very situational ascension that is only great when you have airbag or you're doing some kind of lifesteal thing, but even then it's not great. It's probably best with airbag. Bloody Ammo is an interesting scroll at the 4th position and very situational. You can hold the fire button to continue shooting even though the magazine is out of ammo, but you will take damage from each shot you fire. That damage does not increase. I think it's a flat 2 normal damage that you take. This scroll has killed me in more runs than I'd like to admit. it fits right at home with any lifesteal build, but because those are so rare, because they're not great on many characters, and because they require a very situational position, tends to be very situational for it to be even something you should consider. Next up, we have Flesh and Bones. Flesh and Bones is okay on average. I wouldn't say it's too bad. I'd say that there's a big downside to losing your ability to regen shield and HP. That is not covered by this 2% max HP, which is way too low of a regen to cover the cost. But it does allow you to play lifesteal builds very well on any character, and because it converts shield and armor to HP, that means any max HP or shield increases that you're applying to yourself will turn into health, which is rather interesting and does matter when you're choosing this particular scroll here. One of the unique things about Flesh and Bones, despite being very situational, is that this is worth picking up on a couple of characters early on in the game, because you can drop it when you are at half HP, and you're looking at gaining on average a total of your 50% HP by dropping it during that time. And the reason is because it once it's dropped, it drops and gives you all of your shield / armor. So it's easiest to abuse on Not the Dog. But dropping this can heal you if you're at half HP while holding it. Coin Shot is relatively underrated. Consume 2 coins on hit with plus 60% weapon damage. This is only something that you can use when you have a weapon that's not shooting very quickly, and if you can float losing some money. It's really only best when you are exploiting the fact that the gold you gain from it, the coins you gain, can be increased. So things like Devil's Covenant, even though it just recently got nerfed, is an interesting combination with Coin Shot, because if you kill something within 5 hits, the gold you gained is increased by 50%, and just by killing that thing, you gained extra gold because you had Coin Shot. So 60% weapon damage is quite high. It does come at a quite high cost, and therefore it's very situational. Next up, we have Preemptive Strike. Preemptive Strike is very situational. It is sometimes very good on weapons like Glimmering or Prism. This is always in effect. Also, some swords like the Fire Tower use Preemptive Strike very well. In general, it can be good. It combines well with Advanced Depot, but it's rather situational, and most of the time, it just gives you plus 50% weapon damage on your first shot, which isn't that great. Next up, we have Resolute here on the very situational area. Plus 50% move speed and plus 25% damage when your shield / armor is 0, doubles the time a shield resets before recovering. If I'm not mistaken, this also got a recent buff. Let me check. No, I'm mistaken. I was thinking about the enhanced version, which allows the bonus to remain for 10 seconds. Resolute is a powerful scroll only really when you have Flesh and Bones, because it is permanently active. Outside of that situation, it's not very good. Usually, doubling the time that a shield rests before recovering is very detrimental, as a shield is extremely strong, and even though you're getting plus 50% move speed, the damage isn't very helpful, because really what you're looking for at that point is stuff that'll help you survive, which the movement speed does, but the damage doesn't. So it's kind of like, you know, is it worth getting 50% move speed at the cost of doubling the time that a shield resets? In general, no, so that makes it very situational, but it is extremely powerful with the Flesh and Bones. Next up is Evil Devouring Sword. For each curse scroll you own, plus 15% weapon damage and 20% skill damage. This is okay, but it's only good when you're trying to get curse scrolls, which is very rare, and rarely do you even get offered more than 2 to 3 of them in a game. And at that point, are you taking them just for this benefit, because it's not clear that the costs are actually mitigated by Evil Devouring Sword? In that way, it tends to be very bad and very situational. Last on very situational, we have Sanguine Relic. Sanguine Relic is plus 50% taken, plus 3% lifesteal. That's 1 more lifesteal than the Fire Enthusiast that we've already looked at, but comes at an extremely steep cost. Plus 50% damage taken is pretty hard to justify, especially in Solo Reincarnation 7, where it's very easy to get one shot. I think this is probably one of the worst scrolls in the game. The lifesteal definitely does not compensate for the increased damage taken. You're just asking to die. This is obviously good when you use stuff like Spirit Feline, but in that way, it's very, very situational. And I personally don't even use Spirit Feline because I think it's too busted. So this is an always pass for me. Okay, we're moving into the usually very weak category. We're going to start from the bottom to the top now that these things are in order. So at the very bottom of this tier list, we have Perfect Sixth, which is everyone's joke scroll. Now you do need a worse scroll in the game, and Perfect Sixth is just that. Not only does it not give you much damage because it's additive damage, but the count is reset when you're reloading, so it's not even actually like a 10% damage increase. It's actually worse than that. If you only have a 4 mag, this never triggers. Very bad. Energy Sandals is next on the list. Store 12 points of energy for each dash and consume all energy when using a secondary skill. So basically, each dash gives you plus 12% additive skill damage on your next skill cast. This can be okay in the right skill build. I just sort of realized I'm yelling. Okay, it can be good in the right skill build, but in general, it's not very good at all. It takes a very long time to get more than 24% skill damage increase, which is very, very paltry and hard to maintain. It can rarely be good when you have multiple dashes. Explosive bullets are a really cool ascension idea. Non-elemental weapons have a 20% chance of causing an additional explosion damage equal to 100% of the base damage. The problem is that the way that this particular damage is calculated makes these explosions do extremely, extremely small damage. So we're talking, 100 to 200 damage. This is literally just weapon-based damage with no added benefits, no multipliers whatsoever. So for that reason, it's very weak. Double Exhilaration is up next, and this doubles your secondary skill capacity. Right now, ever since they introduced the Battlefield Support talent, which is pretty accessible even if you haven't been playing for very long, needing secondary skills has been a non-issue, essentially. So Double Exhilaration is very, very, very rarely any good, and in general, quite bad. Hopefully I didn't mess this up because I thought I clicked pause there and I didn't. Anyway, Ammo Recoverer is up next. There are many different ways to recover ammo in scrolls in this game, and Ammo Recoverer sits at the definitely worst area for that. It does not give you much. It gives you random ammo and doesn't prioritize the ammo that you're currently using. So it's quite bad. I will say, once you're full on the other two ammo types, it will give only one ammo type. So it won't give you ammo that you're already full on. Next up, we have Skill Booster. This is similar to Energy Sandals and stores 2 points of energy for each crit, consuming all energy when using a secondary skill. This one is better than Energy Sandals because it's easier to abuse this and actually get some consistently high damage. Say you're using a Lightning Glove, Thunderclap Glove, or a Fire Glove. I don't remember the name. Both of those do a pretty good job, and the Scalpel also does very good. So this Skill Booster skill is only okay if you're doing a skill damage build, and skill damage builds tend to be very bad in R7, so in general, it's quite bad. Next up, we have Improved Clip. Ammo pickups are directly added to the magazine. Upon pickup, 25% move speed until the next reload. This does have some combo pieces. Say if you're using Advanced Depot, you can combine this and always be getting plus 25 move speed, and for that reason it is relatively good. In general, ammo pickups going directly to the magazine isn't that useful. Let me check something real quick. I wasn't exactly clear whether, so you gain like 90 ammo from a normal ammo box, right? I think that's correct. I could be wrong. And I'm not sure if the overflow actually goes into your reserves or not. But in general, that fills up your clip. But it's often the case that you burn through that quicker than this. This will never create a situation where you won't have to reload very often, and often will heal 10 to 20 ammo and not do very much, and then give you 25% move speed for 3 seconds. In general, quite weak. Next up, we have Shrine of Recovery, which fully recovers HP after changing stages. And in general, this effect is not very strong. Anything that's healing you for full is okay and sometimes useful, but in general, it's pretty easy to come by buns that heal you up. And rarely is this the best way to be doing it. Usually you'd prefer it to impact you during combat, and this specifically does not do that. Next up, we've got Thorny Carapace. Uh, Whenever an enemy hits you, release a spike that deals corrosive damage to them. Damage is affected by max shields and armor, max HP, and skill damage. So this does have some potential to actually do some damage, and I think that it has a guaranteed effect of corrosion. I could be wrong about that. Let's see if it says. It says a chance to inflict the decay effect. So not sure how guaranteed that is, but it seems to me to be a relatively high chance. In general, this is rarely super good. It is okay at applying the decay effect though. In a similar vein, we have Thunder Screen, which deals lightning damage to surrounding enemies whenever the shield or armor is broken, and the damage is affected by the max shield, armor, max HP, and skill damage. So the higher those total values are, the more damage that Thunder Screen does. This is okay in the armor break leap build on Qin Yang, but in general, this doesn't do a lot of damage, tends not to apply shock, and in general is relatively underwhelming. You usually don't want to be in the thick of things, and you don't want your shield to break. So having something that gives you a benefit in that case is not very strong. Next up, we have Lightning Enthusiast at the top of the usually very weak. Whenever you inflict the shock effect, you also inflict shock on yourself, which is a 10% damage increase, which is not good. When you are in shock, plus 75% lightning damage. This tends to be okay, but it's not always the case that you're actually doing lightning damage. There are some situations where you might want this, but in general, making yourself take 10% more HP is a pretty big detriment. If you're taking 120, the game is built around the current health that you're taking. Like the damage is built around the current health that they expect you to have. So like a boss doing 10% more damage to you is a lot of damage. I mean, we're looking at, like going from 150 to 165, and that can be death. If the goal of that, mortar shot is to put you at, 10% HP, well, now you're dead. Next up, we have Giant Slayer. Giant Slayer is one of those ascensions that I would like if it were better, but when you do the math, you're really looking at an average of 200 damage per hit increase, 200 true damage, which is okay if you're doing a huge amount of projectiles, but other than that, it's not very strong. Next up, we have Hidden Treasures, which is much better than usually weak when you're playing fresh to R7 and you need all the essence you can get. But in general, this is quite bad. Breakable objects may drop copper with a lower chance of dropping buns and soul essence when destroyed. It is fine, but doesn't really impact the game. I will say being able to get the buns sometimes is quite useful. Next up, we have Fountain of Life, which for a legendary is quite weak. Recover 1 HP when picking up copper or ammo. This is only useful if you are not at full HP and does pretty much nothing otherwise. And so it does do an okay job at healing you, but it just does an okay job, and for that reason it's not very good. Next up, we have Good and Evil. Good and Evil gives you plus 15% lucky shot, which is fine. We'll take that if you don't own a cursed scroll. Or it gives you plus 15 max shield armor for each one you own. This is much better because it has the general benefit of the lucky shot, which we'll take. That's not so bad. But it's a very, very big benefit to get plus 15 max shield or armor for each cursed scroll. And this tends to be a lot better than, say, this guy here, which I forget the name of. Next up, we have Elite Assassin, plus 10% damage dealt for each elite or boss you kill. This is damage dealt, so it does apply to skills. It is all types of damage that you deal, and for that reason, it does make it a little better. The biggest problem with this is it doesn't have any retroactive effects. So if you get this at right before the final boss, it literally gives you no damage increase the whole game. And at best, say you kill, it doesn't. It used to not affect bosses, but now it does, which I like that change. But even still, you're looking at a max of maybe 5 or 6 stacks of this by the end of the game, assuming you get it early. That's okay, but in general, the times where you're going to be picking this up, it's not that great. It's okay, but it's usually quite weak. Next up, we have Bluff. Bluff gives you plus 25% damage dealt when your HP is full. This does do full damage, so it's not just weapon damage, it's skill damage as well. It is rather difficult to keep your HP full all the time, and the benefit is 25% damage, which isn't that high considering it's additive damage. So in general, this is usually weak and can be pretty easily deactivated for long periods of time. Extra Surprise is not too bad, but it's usually weak. Killing an enemy grants copper and an extra chance to receive secondary supplies for skills. If you have a particular build that is burning through secondary skills a lot, then this is a fair way of getting extra secondary skills back, and doesn't come at the downside that the next one does. Slightly better, but the same thing almost, is Capacity Overdraft. Secondary skills can be used when the number of uses is insufficient, but it will cause damage to you. So if you really need to be casting them, and that's really the crux of your damage, and are willing to take a little bit of damage for it, Capacity Overdraft actually does work quite well, because technically it gives you infinite amount of secondaries. This is especially good on someone like Tau, who regens their shield the second that they start that they kill someone. So it mitigates the damage taken by Capacity Overdraft upon casting the skill. Devil's Covenant was recently nerfed and is now much, much worse. Minus 50% max HP, but plus 50% copper gained while you have the scroll. Now, it used to double the scroll, double your shield, double your gold when you picked it up, but it was undroppable and only reduced your current HP. So this went from being very good, I would say, maybe even broken, to not very good. The way that you use this now is you don't hold it during combat. So during combat, you drop this. You have to pull up your menu, right click to drop it. And then once you've killed all the enemies, you pick it back up and then gain the 50% scroll increase. Because of this added tax on the user to have to do all that work, and because the benefit is not very strong, it's usually quite rather weak. Unfettered Will gives you plus 3% weapon damage for every 100 copper you have, up to 30%. So this means that if you have 1,000 copper, that you are getting the max effect, and it's just weapon damage. So it's pretty easy to do, but it's only 30%. It's additive weapon damage. It's not that impactful. Next up, we have Ammo Belt. Your ammo capacity gets doubled. This is a particularly good scroll when you have a lot of consumption problems and are looking for ways to increase the amount of reserves that you have. In general, Ammo Belt does a fair job at making ammo not an issue when you have high consumption, but usually it's a non-factor. Genesis is similar to Ammo Belt in the sense that it has a little bit more of an immediate effect. When shooting, there's a 20% chance to add extra ammo into the magazine. So that's one extra ammo for whatever you're shooting. So essentially, this extends your magazine by 20% each time. And that is relatively good. And because it has a more immediate impact, I think it's a little better than Ammo Belt. Ninja Invincibility is strangely named because it's a damage scroll that gives you plus 5% lucky shot chance per second up to 50%, but resets after triggering a lucky shot. This particular ascension has gotten much better since its upgrade, and in general, I think this is quite good. It's much better than it used to be. I still think that it is rather weak, but it has a very high chance of guaranteeing a lucky shot every once in a while, and tends to be better on lower shots per second weapons. So weapons that shoot slowly. Terminal Lucidity is good on the dog especially, but in general it's not quite too strong. When you're taking 20% of your max HP in a single hit, that means you're taking a very, very large amount of damage, and usually that ends up being more than 20%. Usually resetting your skill at that time isn't the most important thing. I'd say it is okay on certain characters, but in general, it tends to be usually weak. Gourmet is an unexpectedly fine ascension or a scroll. It causes buns to recover full HP. It is usually weak, but sometimes when you're playing a brawler character who kills characters up in their face, you tend to take damage and tend to be actually not full HP by the time you kill, say, like one of the flamethrowers in the Angsty Desert, or the octopus in Duo Fjord. So having a guaranteed full heal on a single bun drop is actually quite nice. Magic Magazine just got buffed and is quite a bit better than it used to be. There's a 33% chance of not consuming reserves, so that's essentially a 33% increase in the total reserves you have. And the magazine that doesn't consume the reserve also gets plus 30% weapon damage, which can be quite good. If you have a very large magazine weapon, Magic Magazine does tend to work much better with that. It's an additive increase, so it's not that much, but it's relatively easy to trigger, and because you can kind of continually reload until you trigger it, you can always start a room with it, and for that reason, it's usually weak, but much better than it used to be. Wait for Good is a usually weak scroll, but can be good in some situations. The important thing about Wait for Good is that you don't have to not shoot for 10 seconds. It just means that every 10 seconds you get a shot that is a guaranteed crit. This can be abused with swords to cause them to crit, which can be sometimes useful. In general, this is not the best scroll, but it is okay. It does take the right build for it to be useful. If you're using this with a machine gun, it won't do very well at all. Currently, there are some abuses you can do with injectors that you can go and research for yourself, where you can permanently make this active for the entirety of the injector clip. I won't give you more than that, but if you can figure it out, figure it out. We are now in the balanced section of our scroll tier list, making our way through it. And at the bottom of the balanced section, we've got reinforced eggshell, minus 30% taken when shield and armor is not 0, and plus 30% taken damage when shield or armor is 0. So basically, this gives you're tankier when you have shield and armor, and not as tanky when you just have HP. In general, this tends to be a net positive for most characters except the dog. And I think it's quite balanced. In general, when you are given chests that increase your health or your shield, most people pick the shield or armor, and that makes reinforced eggshell that much better. I wouldn't say that it's exceptional, but it does give you 30% damage reduction, which is very good, and tends to be quite balanced. Next up, we have Deadly Curse. I was given a lot of information that this might be too low on my tier list, but personally, I think that this is deserved of the balance section. It gives you plus 75 weapon damage and skill damage, which is quite nice that you get both of those, but it comes at a huge cost of minus 75 max HP. This means that the dog can't use it, and most characters do suffer a relatively large drawback. Obviously, this works great with Spirit Feline, but because I don't use Spirit Feline, I've sort of built this list as the way that I play it, and Deadly Curse just really never can get floating, because losing 75% of your max HP is just much too risky and just asking to get one shot later. The damage increases that it does give are very substantial, so if you're playing a build that's very safe, then the Deadly Curse might be a good option for you, especially if you're playing something like Sniper or Pure Crit, or rather Pure Sniper Lay Low. Deadly Curse gets a lot better. Next up, we have one of my favorite scrolls, Bullet Light. Each shot will consume 1 additional spare ammo, and plus 25% lucky shot chance. Recover consumed spare ammo when triggering a lucky shot. So my understanding the way this works is that it's actually these stack. So if you shoot 3 times, you have plus 75% lucky shot chance, and then you recover 1 spare ammo when triggering the lucky shot. So overall, this is a consumption negative, especially because missed shots count double as far as your ammo consumption. But 25% lucky shot is very useful and is essentially a 25% multiplicative damage increase overall, and helps you get to that very important plus 100% lucky shot. So I would say that overall this is balanced, has some positives, has some negatives. Next up, we have Effective Split, which randomly gives you 2 Occult Scrolls and you cannot discard them. In general, I think this is balanced. The only downside with this is there are some scrolls that have very negative consequences for you, and the fact that you can't discard them can make you lose a run. So Effective Split can't be too much higher than balanced, because it has that potential to actually stop a run in its tracks sometimes. So this is an okay scroll. Next up, we have Elemental Convergence. Elemental Convergence gives plus 15% elemental damage for each nearby enemy with an elemental effect, up to plus 75, which I think is 5 enemies. This scroll works pretty well if you're doing elemental damage. If you're not doing elemental damage, it's very, very bad. The biggest problem with this is that you have to be nearby for them to work. I wonder if this tells us the range. Yeah, and another downside about this one is if the effect wears off or the enemy dies, the damage is lowered. So actually killing something with that elemental effect reduces its effectiveness. And in general, plus 75% elemental damage is great when it's working, but it's kind of hard to get it working. And so for that reason, it's relatively balanced. Next up, we have one of my favorite scrolls, Untold Effort. When using a secondary skill, there's a 50% chance to double the consumption and a 50% chance to deal double damage. The way that I see this happening is that these are two independent effects. So it is not when you, I don't think these are tied. I think that you can do one or the other or both on any time you use a secondary skill. The double damage is a multiplicative damage increase. So this is a good scroll whenever you're trying to do a secondary skill build. Very cool. One of the most straightforward scrolls in the game is Brutal Glove that gives plus 35 weapon or skill damage to non-critical hits. This tends to be okay. It's not a huge amount of damage. It's an additive increase, but it does apply skill damage, which tends to be okay. So it's okay. Copper Miner is a balanced scroll that says all enemies die within 7 meters drop 2 times the basic reward. This is the reward that comes out of them when they explode. 7 meters is relatively close, but doubling the amount of gold you get from each kill is quite nice, and so for that reason, this is a balanced scroll. Elemental Bestowment may look worse than it is at first glance. If you're running an elemental build, this is an okay scroll for you. Recovering 1% max HP is fine, but the 10 ammo that you get goes directly into your magazine whenever you kill an enemy affected by an elemental effect. So if you're running something like a Lightning Blast or a Thunder Glove, or even something like a Scorching Rounds, every time you get a kill, you're essentially filling up that magazine and being able to shoot more and more. I would say that this is a relatively balanced scroll, and something you should consider in your elemental builds. There are 3 different shards in the game, and at the bottom we have the Lightning Shard. This gives plus 25% lightning damage and immunity to the negative effects of shock, which is that plus 10% damage taken. The additive effect is doubled while in shock effect. What that means is when you are in shock, then this gets doubled. So you do 50% increased lightning damage. In general, lightning damage is just used as a vehicle for miasma, so the damage increase isn't really useful. You do not get immunity to the stun of shock grenades, and so for that reason, the lightning shard is relatively weak. Next up, we have the newly buffed Rock Hard Determination. Plus 50% damage while being stationary, which gradually decreases over 4 seconds. This was quite a good buff to this particular scroll. It requires you to stay still for about maybe half a second, I would say, is what it feels like for it to work. And the fact that it gradually decreases over such a long duration, 4 seconds is quite long, it's actually quite easy to keep it up. I would say that this is a pretty easy plus, 30 damage, total damage increase that is active most of the time. And it's additive damage, so it's not super great, but it's pretty good. In the same vein, we have Midair Strike. I do love that these 2 Ascension scrolls are very evenly balanced. Plus 50% damage dealt while in the air. So I'd say this has a very similar effect to the Rock Hard Determination. I'd say it's a little easier to activate because I tend to jump a lot. And this affects while you're falling as well. And it's total damage, it's additive, it's pretty good. Mystic Mirror is a scroll that has 2 very powerful effects that alternate every 12 seconds. The biggest drawback, and the reason this isn't as good, is because it's very hard to control which of those 2 is going to be active at any given time. You're either taking 20% damage or dealing 50% damage, but you're never really aware of which one is currently affecting you. And for that reason, it tends to be one of the most even keel balanced scrolls in the game because it applies a benefit that you're not particularly aware of that tends to be relatively strong. And for that reason, it's hard to exploit and hard to be much better than balanced. Next up, we have Evil Banishing Tone. Evil Banishing Tone gains immunity to all cursed scrolls, which is relatively useful. There are a lot of evil chests or chat chests that do force you to take cursed scrolls if you want to get their goodies. And having the immunity gives you the benefit to, not be so afraid of certain choices from those chat chests or effective split as well. This scroll here. So I would say overall it's balanced, but it's not great. Next up, we have one of my favorite scrolls in the game, Thunder Step. After using a dash, a thunder is released, which will damage and temporarily imprison them. One second. If I'm not mistaken, this is about a 1 second stun duration, and it applies about 0.25 seconds after you dash in your dash spot where you dashed from. This is especially good in melee builds where you can stand on top of people, dash backwards, stun them, and then hit them with the melee while they're stunned. I would say that this is one of the most fun ascensions in the game to work with. I keep saying ascensions. One of the most fun scrolls to work with. But there are certain builds that just won't be able to use this because you don't want to be up close and personal. In general, it is a good way to, it is a last ditch kind of like, oh man, I'm in danger. I'm gonna face this person and dash backwards and they get stunned. That's pretty good when you know what you're doing. Blazing Hoop is essentially an elemental applicator. For every 10 seconds, it releases a flame pulse that deals fire damage and inflicts the burning effect for 3 seconds on all enemies it passes through. There is some contention about whether this is actually 3 seconds, if I remember correctly. It may be longer than 3 seconds, because I don't think that burning can just be applied for 3 seconds. I think burning is always 5 seconds. Regardless, this is okay. It is a way to apply burning. And if you're looking for a way to apply burning in an area around you and you're not too afraid of being close to people, then this is an okay scroll. I'd say it's relatively well balanced. I would say it's the worst of the 3 hoops. Next up, we have the second best of the 3 hoops, which is Magnetic Coil. Every 10 seconds, it releases a shock effect for 6 seconds on all enemies it passes through. I don't think that this one does damage, though. That being said, this is a little bit better than the fire damage one because this also makes them all take 10% multiplicative damage increase because of the shock effect, which is okay. Not great, but it applies the shock effect. So if you're looking to apply a shock effect and you don't mind being close to people, Magnetic Coil is great. One little tidbit I'll throw in here is that if, say, you get Magnetic Coil and Blazing Hoop, oh, well, that's great. You'd like to be able to apply Manipulation. When those 2 elemental effects are applied at the same time, you're going to trigger a Manipulation, and that gets really strong. Well, the problem is, how do you get those 2 hoops to sync up? Well, there's a trick that Slight's going to key you in on. Drop both of the scrolls, and then pick them up right in time with each other, and they will sync so that they always pulse out at the same time, and that's much, much stronger. Next up, we've got Elemental Cube, which I used to have lower than this, but I'd say it's much better than I originally gave it credit for. A random element will be selected after reloading and increase that elemental damage by 50%. 50% damage, additive damage on elemental damage only, and only the specific type of elemental damage tends to be really limiting, but on certain builds, this can be a really easy fit. Obviously, if you're doing fire damage and you have a weapon that you're using with Advanced Depot, drop Advanced Depot, shoot, reload until this triggers to fire, and you just gain yourself 50% damage increase, which is definitely not nothing to scoff at. But weapons like the Prism or the Fire Tower get a guaranteed use out of this all the time, and so for that reason I'd say it's pretty well balanced and fits into some builds pretty well. Next up, we have Fast Loader. After swapping weapons, replenish the magazine instantly and plus 30% lucky shot chance, which gradually reduces to 0 over 3 seconds. I would say that Fast Loader tends to be quite good, especially if you are having a weapon that's biggest downside is reloading it. Then having Fast Loader can be quite useful. The biggest problem is that if there are any scrolls, ascensions, or inscriptions that trigger only upon reload, Fast Loader does not trigger those. It does not count as reloading the weapon. It just replenishes the magazine. And plus 30% lucky shot tends to be okay. If you're moving through an entire clip rather quickly, like on Wild Hunt, for instance, this does a very good job. Next up, we have the new scroll premium membership. Refunds 30% of copper when consumed, and I've got this set up right there. Um, this is a pretty good scroll. Essentially, this is a 30% increase in all of the copper that you get, but it's actually a little better than that because you have a chance, because of your talents, to double the amount of copper that you get. When you get this 30% copper refund, it occurs as a separate gain of coin, so you have that 25% chance to double it. So on average, this is actually a 37.5% reduction uh, or refund, which tends to be pretty good. Next up, we have another one of my favorite scrolls in the game, Lone Ranger. When there are no monsters around, 12 meters gain 1 stack every 0.5 seconds, up to 20 stacks. On the contrary, lose 1 stack every 0.5 seconds. So basically, if there is a monster within 12 meters, then you start losing stacks. Importantly, more monsters do not make it go down faster. Okay, so it only goes up and down whether there is an or is not a monster. And then you get plus 1% lucky shot for each stack and an extra 5 when you reach 20 stacks. This is one of the best scrolls that you can get for lay low when you're going pure crit sniper, because you really need to hit that plus 100% lucky shot to be doing that chunky damage. And in general, I think it works okay. 12 meters isn't too bad. I'd love to see that move down to 10 or something, but I think it's a pretty good scroll. Not great. Next up, we have Elemental Torment. Plus 20% lucky shot chance against enemies affected by elemental effect. 20% lucky shot tends to be a 20% average multiplicative damage boost, which is pretty good. It's relatively easy if you're doing an elemental build to get this effect. If you're not doing an elemental build, it's okay. Usually by the end of the game, you are applying elemental effects. So for that reason, it's not as restrictive as the Lone Ranger is. It doesn't quite have the same payoff, but it does have a restriction. So it's pretty good, but not great. Next up, we have Casual Gunmanship. This may look worse than it is. Plus 20% lucky shot chance, but minus 20% weapon damage when you don't make a lucky shot. Even with just your base lucky shot plus this, you're looking at a 45% chance to lucky shot. So you're only getting this minus 20% weapon damage on 55% of your attacks. And in general, even with just this being what it is, you're looking at a damage increase that's slight, or a slight damage increase. I'd say overall, it's not nearly as bad of a downside as it looks. Once you're getting to like an 80% lucky shot chance, I mean, the downside is basically 0. And when you're at 100% lucky shot, it is a 0% downside. And it moves you in that direction, and that's a great direction to be going. Next up, we have the best, or at least the most consistent enthusiast, Corrosion Enthusiast. Whenever you inflict the decay effect to enemies, also inflict the decay effect on yourself. When you are in decay, minus 20% damage taken and plus 40% move speed. So the way these apply ends up causing you to not, I think you end up losing a little bit more than just 10% move speed, because we see that decay gives you minus 50% move speed and you gain 40%. I'm not exactly sure how that works. But if you're not actively applying decay, this is a 100% upside scroll, because it says when you are in decay, it's basically saying you're not going to get move speed reduced nearly as much, and you're actually going to reduce the amount of damage that you're taking. So this is a great way to mitigate the effects of decay. And if you are able to combo this with anything that removes the penalty of decay, this movement speed, which would be this little snow boots, or the corrosion shard, both of those make this particular enthusiast scroll very strong, because you get a permanent, essentially almost a permanent boost. 20% minus 20% damage taken and 40% move speed is really, really powerful and not that hard to get. Next up, we have Tactical Reload. When reloading, plus 20% damage taken and minus 30% move speed. There are some builds in this game that reload a lot, and so having damage reduction and move speed during that time is extremely useful, especially on the dog, who has 2 weapons and therefore can be reloading double the amount of time while dual wielding. Tactical Reload tends to be pretty good, and I don't like to be waiting around, so If I just switch, when I'm running to the next room, I'll switch to my foundry, shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot, reload, and keep this permanent plus 30% movement speed on myself so I can get to the next room faster. Next up, we have Resilient Life. After taking damage, restore 3% HP for 5 seconds. This tends to be an okay scroll. You don't have to take the damage to your HP to start healing your HP. And the way that I like to think of this is very similar to the buns, where you are basically setting yourself up to be healing your health. In general, healing your health isn't super strong, but it is okay, and we don't like to be at low HP if we can avoid it. We'd prefer to be kind of healing that HP up as we can, and even though we're sort of relying on our shields or armor to do most of our damage mitigation, in general, I think this tends to be one of the better ways to heal that HP up. In the same vein, I would say Airbag does essentially the same thing. Airbag reduces your HP when your shield is armor is full and recovers 100% HP when the shield armor gets broken. This recovering of the HP, if I'm not mistaken, reactivates itself when your shield and armor gets full again, right? So what this is essentially a way to heal your HP. All right, when you think about what's happening here, sure, it reduces our HP for now. Really, that's just to set up combos with stuff like this guy and this guy, which we'll talk about here in just a sec. Because those things give you bonuses the lower your HP is. But once it matters, when it really counts that your HP is getting attacked, you're recovering 100% of your HP at that moment. And so this essentially says, as long as you can keep your shield and armor full every once in a while, that's essentially a full heal on your HP with some added weirdness in the combo. A good scroll tends to be good. It also has a unique feature where all of the damage that would roll over to your health is removed. So it's a damage rollover mitigation on one tick of damage, which can be good, especially against bosses. Next up, we have Veteran. Veteran says +1 max HP for each enemy you kill within 7 meters. 7 meters tends to be pretty close to you, but if you get this early enough, you can very easily get to +250 to 300 HP by doing like a melee build or something that you're relatively close range. In general, I'd say it tends to not be amazing because especially if you get it later in the game, you're only looking at maybe 30 to 50 HP you gain, which tends not to matter too much. But if you can get this early, it can be extremely strong. And for that reason, I think it's on the higher side of the balance category. Next up, we have Persistent. And one thing that you'll notice in my tier list is that things that give you damage reduction tend to be higher rated than other things. Anything that's going to be giving you damage reduction is really highly valuable, especially in solo reincarnation, because it saves you from being one-shot. Now, damage reduction does not stack additively, so you can't get to 100% damage reduction and take 0% damage. That being said, it does stack, and the more you have of it, the better you are, although you are getting diminishing returns. And so Persistent says minus 0.5% damage taken for every 1% HP missing. I think the total here, is so at 1% you're reducing damage by half, but at 50% you're getting like a 25% damage reduction, so that's pretty good. This is exceptionally powerful with Airbag. Next up we have Flowing Time. All remaining cooldowns minus 1 second on hit, triggered once every 2 seconds. So if you're shooting, at the optimum time, you're looking at -1 cooldown for your primary and dash every 2 seconds. So if you dash in primary and then hit, you're basically reducing your dash from 3 seconds to 2 seconds. I don't know why this is. It's okay. It's pretty good. It's pretty easy to do. It tends to be easy to get almost the maximum effect. The cooldown, I guess what I'm trying to say that you're getting a -1 second cooldown every 2 seconds. It's pretty good. I felt like I had more to say about this one, and I don't know where I'm going, so we're just going to move on. Merciless Strike is at the top of the balanced and not quite usually strong because it has a big negative effect. Plus 50% lucky shot chance on critical hit, but minus 50% lucky shot on a normal hit. In general, this plus 50% lucky shot on critical hit is usually enough to cause a lucky shot. And when you get a lucky shot and a crit hit at the same time, those multiplicatively increase like apply the damage increases to each other. So you get huge damage increases when you can do that. And for that reason, most Merciless Strike is quite strong when you're applying crit hits. But the minus 50% lucky shot chance on normal hit tends to be rather bad on builds where you're trying to crit, but you can't always crit. Like if you're using an angelic aura, you can only get so many crit hits out of that magazine. And so how much damage are you really getting from Merciless Strike? It's probably a net positive, but it's not quite as good as it may seem. Obviously, this is extremely strong on any sniping build. Silver Metal is a unique, oh, actually, we're in the usually strong category. And the bottom of the usually strong category is silver metal. When your shield starts recharging when you kill an enemy or destroy an item. This tends to be okay. It's not always very useful. It's not useful on Tau or Bird or on Albai, but you really wouldn't pick it on any of those characters. But when you pick it on the cat or lay low, it tends to be quite good. During battle, if you just get hit, all you have to do is shoot a destructible item, and your shield just starts recharging again. And that can be quite good, especially the cat, who has some survivability problems, benefits a lot from this. And for that reason, it's usually quite strong when it's picked up. Abundant Vitality is a very unique scroll in the sense that it gives plus 75% weapon damage while your shield is recharging. Now, your shield isn't recharging all the time, and that's kind of a weird time for you to be getting a bonus. So it's not always easy to use, and for that reason, you might think that it's usually weak, but the big thing about Abundant Vitality is for some reason, at this point in the game, the plus 75% weapon damage you get is multiplicative for no particular reason, and for that reason, it makes it much, much stronger than it normally would be. If you are willing to give this scroll a little attention and actively try to use it, the damage increases are substantial. Next up, we have Long Shot. Long Shot increases weapon damage when hitting the enemy further away from you. The further they are, the larger the bonus, up to a 100% weapon damage increase. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the range is on this Long Shot, but even if you're at around 10 meters, which is a fair distance to be, you're still getting a benefit. Even if you're pretty close, you're getting. My assumption is that this is a linear increase in damage, and so on average, you're getting something like a 50% increase in damage for this. Doesn't really require you to do very much. So for that reason, it's usually strong and doesn't require a lot of thought from you. Next up, we have Dormant Bullet. The fewer bullets remaining in the magazine, the higher the weapon damage, up to 75% increase. That's a lot of damage increase that isn't at a very high cost. If you're shooting through a magazine, you're getting, a 37% increase overall. Weapons with lower magazines, I think, tend to get a slightly or a potentially better increase. I'm sure that at certain magazine sizes, you may actually get a slightly better average increase than the 37%. But don't quote me on that because I'm just talking off the top of my head. In general, tends to be good. This is especially good if you empty most of your magazine and then pick up a advanced depot because you can get the effect permanently. Next up, we have a scroll that might surprise you that it's this high in the tier list, On the House. I think On the House does a pretty good job at mitigating the costs of peddler purchases. There's usually only one or two things that I want to buy at any given peddler, and this essentially reduces that cost to zero, which means I can put things into upgrades. I would say the total savings from a early On the House are very, very high, and not to be underestimated. I think this is a rather strong scroll. And stronger than most people give it credit for. Next up, we have Realm of Corrosion, which is the best of the three wheels of, or three rings of elemental damage. Every 10 seconds, release a corrosive pulse that inflicts the decay effect on all enemies it passes through. This tends to be relatively good because it has the most immediate effect of slowing enemies that are nearby you. And in general, that tends to be good no matter what class you're playing. If you're playing a build that wants to keep people away, well, when people get near you, they have a chance of being slowed by a significant margin, reducing their threat. And if you're like on top of people and playing a melee build, you're sort of ducking in and out of threat ranges, and Realm of Corrosion makes that even easier to do. Not only that, Decay tends to be the weak link in a Miasma build, so having this sort of with a lightning weapon tends to activate a Miasma build relatively well. Next up, we have Final Judgment, which is usually strong. Weapon attacks instantly kill enemies with less than 15% HP remaining, or bosses with less than 8% HP remaining. Many people think that this isn't quite as good as it is, but I'll make the case that Final Judgment is a little better than you might give credit for, but it does depend on the build you're doing. So builds that do consistent damage over time are going to do a lot better. Doing the 8% remaining damage on a boss always feels really nice when they die early. That always feels really, really great. The actual damage it does is relatively high because of how much HP they have. But the biggest reason I think this is usually strong is because the damage that you're doing usually comes at the right time. So like that last 15% damage, just being able to instantly kill people, no nonsense, makes things a lot easier on the player, because oftentimes you're having to look at an enemy, shoot him, and he's returning fire. And the sooner you can kill that enemy, the better. And I am often in a case where many of the enemies that get the Final Judgment trigger are actively shooting at me. So if I can say, I'm not just killing them quickly, I'm also saving threat. And because of the timing when Final Judgment tends to proc. So I would say this is better than most people give it credit for. Safety measures is, I think, maybe even secretly overpowered. Dashing after being injured recovers 50% of the total damage taken within 1 second. So it looks back 1 second from when you dashed, and it recovers 50% of that damage. Well, if you have multiple dashes, or you can reset your dash, you can double, and you can sort of heal off of it, which is really, really strong. And if you're like healing shield, but you still took damage, so like with the bird, you can heal even though you've healed since then. So it just keeps track of damage. It doesn't care like whether you've gained total, net positive, net negative kind of stuff. And for that reason, it's very strong. It's a very strong regenerative ability if you know how to use it. And it heals shields and armor, so it's not just HP. I think this might be undervalued on my tier list and may even make its way higher as people figure this out a little bit more. I personally don't use Advanced Depot, so if I'm looking for a no reload combo, Skateboarder or Against the Flow are the only two options for me. And Skateboarder tends to be the worst of those three options, but it is quite good. Filling the magazine instantly after dashing is a good way to keep you from ever having to reload, as you can do this every 3 seconds. The biggest problem is if your weapon goes through its magazine very quickly. Skateboarder tends not to be good enough to be able to fill it up quickly enough unless you have other scrolls that actually increase your ability to dash more often. Next up, we have Curiosity Box. Randomly get 1 to 3 occult scrolls when picking up the scroll, with an extremely small chance of obtaining a occult scroll. So I think just recently this got fixed, but for a while there, this extremely small chance of obtaining a cursed scroll was like almost guaranteed. And on average, you'd be getting 2 cursed scrolls per Curiosity Box. Which is really funny. But overall, randomly getting 1 to 3 occult scrolls is pretty good because you can drop them. This is a lot better than effective split, where you can't discard, and for that reason I think this is usually quite a strong option. Next up, we have Flame Shard. Fire damage plus 25% and immune to the negative effects of burning effect. The additive effect is doubled while in the burning effect. So while you are burning, this damage is increased to 50%. Okay? Immunity to the negative effects of burning effect is pretty nice. When those fireballs hit you, or when you get hit with the burning effect, the biggest downside to that is the damage is usually bad. We don't like the damage, right? But the biggest downside is that you can't regenerate your shield during that time. And so being able to remove that effect and allow yourself to your shield to start regenerating again is very powerful, and should not be undervalued. At the very top of all of the ways that you can fix your ammo problems, I have Bullet Bank at the very top. All picked up ammo will automatically convert to the current equipped weapons type. Also, unspokenly, this Bullet Bank always gives you 90 ammo of whatever ammo it picks up. So it is extremely good for all situations when you need ammo. It tends to be quite good, no matter what. Uh, and yeah, it solves all of your ammo problems on almost all builds, and is very good. Another thing you'll notice as we go toward the top here is that not only do we have damage reduction being highly valued, we also have movement speed being exceptionally highly valued. I would say that there's almost nothing more valuable in this game than having some move speed bonuses. Because of the way that enemy tracking works, once you're getting to plus 30 to 40% move speed, by strafing, most weapon projectiles will not hit you at all. And so getting to that critical amount of movement speed is extremely important. And once you're there, it's a lot harder to die against normal enemies. For that reason, Decay Driver, with giving a plus 20% move speed for 3 seconds after inflicting decay or hurting an enemy under decay, is quite strong. 20% move speed is nothing to scoff at. It tends to be pretty easy to satisfy those requirements. All you need is something like Realm of Corrosion or some kind of decay applicator. Even Thorny Carapace can work, and you're doing plus 20% movement speed for 3 seconds, which is ideal. Next up, we have Arms Dealer. Arms Dealer says minus 20% damage taken and plus 30% damage dealt for 10 seconds whenever you consume 100 ammo. I wanted to make sure I did a pretty good job with this tier list, as good as I could, so I had a lot of conversations about the tier list before I made this video. And Arms Dealer was one that people tend to tell me that was much too high, but I tend to disagree. The main crux is, can you consume 100 ammo in 10 seconds? And I would say that most builds can very easily do that. And if you can, you're getting minus 20% damage taken and plus 30% damage dealt almost for free and pretty much permanently. There are certain builds that this should be avoided on, but any build that's shooting a lot of ammo will be significantly benefited by the damage reduction and damage dealt. Next up, we have the Sniper's Paradise Hawkeye Sight, plus 2 times crit, however, minus 50% damage when not triggering a crit. Weapons with scope gain 2 times zoom. So this basically multiplies your crit X, but reduces the damage reduces your weapon damage when not triggering a crit hit. This 50% damage is multiplicative, so you're doing a significantly less damage when not critting, but the gained crit damage is quite strong, and it looks like this gives plus 2 flat crit X, excuse me. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this. I thought it doubled your crit, but maybe it just gives you plus 2 crit. Anyway, it tends to be quite good. If you can hit a lot of crits, you're highly skilled, this will be better for you. If you're playing a sniper rifle build, this is extremely good. In general, I think most players can look at this and think, ah, that's a sniper weapon, and avoid it because they're not going to be critting all the time. And for that reason, I think it's quite good, because when it's picked, it's like reasonably picked, probably even by new players, and it does a really good job when it's picked for the right purpose. Next up, we have the Spirit Bible, which is interestingly named, and you'll see that I've got it right there wedged in between those two, plus 120% skill damage. This is a very, very needed scroll in the game at this point, as there are very few things that do something like this, and I really, really like that it does this. This is obviously good in a skill damage build, or a build that could use a little skill damage, as 120% skill damage, nothing to scoff at. It obviously isn't the best if you're not using your skills and should be strictly avoided, but in general tends to be quite strong. Next up, we have one of my favorite scrolls in the game, Snow Boots. Gain immunity to slows and minus 50% damage taken from traps. This is one of the best scrolls you can get early on in the Longling Tomb because of all of the fire traps. Minus 50% damage taken from traps is wonderful, especially because it stacks on all your other damage reduction. So really, really helps you not take so much damage against traps. Also, this allows this allows you to combo with Corrosion Enthusiast, and those two scrolls together do some really, really fun stuff when you're applying decay. Next up, we have a scroll that you might not value quite as highly as I do. When HP is reduced to 0, it's Lifesaver, by the way. When HP is reduced to 0, HP is fixed at 1 for 5 seconds. Killing an enemy within this duration will recover 50% max HP and 50% max shield and armor. This occult scroll is destroyed after being triggered once. So this is a one-time, oh man, we're in a bad spot, but we're going to live. We're going to make it through it this one time, okay? And I would say that that's very valuable in solo reincarnation 7 right now. Anything that's going to give you more lives in solo reincarnation 7 is extremely valuable, even if it's not the best way of doing that. This tends to save me from having to use one of my 2 lives, and for that reason, it should not be undervalued. It tends to be very strong. Next up, we have Wind Rider. After dashing 3 times, gain immunity to damage briefly. This is a high skill cap scroll that I particularly like a lot. It's obviously very good if you can reduce the cooldown of your dashes or gain more dashes, but even without that, you can time this very easily by dashing, and holding your dash for the time where you know you're going to be taking damage. Wind Rider does a very good job at mitigating damage at an important time for the character, and that makes it a lot stronger than you might realize when it's used appropriately, because you can do 2 dashes and walk into a room not dashing, knowing that your first dash is going to make you immune, and that gives you a lot more flexibility than normal. I would say that this tends to be undervalued, and I know that some people may disagree, but I think that this is a very strong scroll. Next up, we have Flowing Wind. While moving, the faster you move, the less damage you take, up to 20%. And from my experience, and I could be wrong here, I'm getting the sense that if you're moving, you're getting 20%, and otherwise you're not. There may be some code in there that's actually reducing the damage like mitigation, but it seems like if you're moving, you're taking 20% less damage, which is good. It's very easy to maintain this damage reduction, which is why I value this so highly. You'll notice that in general, I think that damage mitigation in any form tends to be better than actually doing damage, because doing damage is a lot easier than it is to survive damage in Gunfire Reborn right now. And so for that reason, Flowing Wind, while not being super exciting, tends to be strong and helps you take less damage, which is important. Next up, we have Corrosion Shard. Corrosion Shard says plus 25% damage, immunity to the negative effects of decay, and the additive effect is doubled while in decay effect, which means that this 25% goes to 50%. That's the doubled additive effect. This tends to be probably the best of the elemental shards, because minus 50% move speed usually means death because of how debilitating minus 50% move speed is. So gaining immunity to that is great. You can also combo Corrosion Shard with Corrosion Enthusiast to great effect. And the corrosion damage increase tends to be better on more characters than at least the Lightning Shard. So for that reason, I would say it's the best of the shards. Next up, we have Backup Shield. Backup Shield recovers 40% shield or armor instantly when the shield or armor is broken with a 10-second cooldown. This tends to be quite good. I think that it does not prevent rollover damage, so it doesn't do anything fancy there. So if it dealt damage to your health, you'll just take health damage and then your shield will pop back up. It happens after the damage that breaks the shield or armor, though. So it doesn't sort of happen at the same time or before. It happens after. So if something one-shots you, Backup Shield may even trigger on your death screen with you having shield but you being dead. But in general, despite that, it tends to be quite strong. Next up, we have Phantom Skin. Gain 1 layer every 10 seconds. 1 layer is consumed when you take damage and restores 30% shield or armor. You can only have 3 layers of Phantom Skin at any time. So this triggers after you take damage and then heals your shield or armor. So it's better when you're taking chunkier hits, Otherwise, you're not getting the full benefit. So if you take 3 small hits in a row, sure, it's going to restore 30% of your shield or armor, but that's a lot of that is going to be lost because you only took 10 armor and you're healing for 30, so 20% of that heal is sort of lost. Regardless, tends to be very strong, tends to make you much more tanky, even though it's not often the easiest thing to understand that it's working while you're playing. Next up, we have the new and improved Brief Respite, which is one of my favorite scrolls in the game. Gain immunity to all damage for 1 second after swapping or reloading with a 2-second cooldown. They just added the ability for this to reload. Usually it was just swapping, but this tends to be a very good scroll, especially in boss battles, when there's a targeted high damage attack that you can easily avoid with Brief Respite. Reloading just makes it even more easy to use this particular scroll, and I would say that it tends to be very undervalued. 1 second immunity is nothing to scoff at and does a really good job at keeping you alive when you know what you're doing. Next up, we have Ostrich Rider at the top of the usually strong, plus 50% movement speed and plus 300% dash cooldown. I would say that this is a very, very strong scroll. Plus 50% move speed is very useful and is often all that you need to make sure that stray bullets are not going to hit you and to get out of problematic bandit retainer situations and to be able to kite most elites in the game. That being said, the dash cooldown being tripled is meaningful and does mess with a lot of synergies in the game, and a lot of mistakes can't be fixed. But one thing that you can always do is, if you are in a position where you need to dash to live, then you can drop Ostrich Rider, and that will scale the current cooldown of your dash to the same percentage left. So say you have 2 seconds left on your dash cooldown, and then you drop Ostrich Rider, you'll end up having like, I think 1 second left. No. Like it's like 0.6 seconds left before you can dash, and then you can dash, and then you can come pick up Ostrich Rider later. Something to keep in mind. In general, a very, very strong scroll. Next up, we have the new scroll, Stone Skin, which is the bottom of the usually very strong category. These things tend to be some of the best scrolls in the game. They tend to be unique. They tend to either improve damage significantly or in a unique or way, have extremely high utility, or very high damage reduction, which in the case of Stone Skin is what we have. This does not stack, but it does re-trigger on taking a damage again. This is almost a permanent minus 30% damage if you're taking intermittent damage, because it lasts for 3 seconds. And 30% damage taken, minus 30% damage taken is quite a lot, and is more than you usually get. And for that reason, it is usually very strong, and it is very accessible. Next up, we have Speedy Pursuit, which gives you plus 50% lucky shot chance for 2 seconds after dashing. Right here it says, since dashing has a 1.875 cooldown after you have your talents maxed out, this pretty much has a 100% uptime as far as gaining plus 50% lucky shot, and for that reason it's very strong. Getting to the critical plus 100% lucky shot hugely improves the damage output of every build, and Speedy Pursuit is a very accessible way for almost every build to do that, and for that reason it is usually very strong and almost never not a bad choice. Next up, we have Advanced Joggers. Advanced Joggers is a humble minus 50% dash cooldown. Because movement speed and dashing is so important, this is usually a very strong scroll, and should not be underrated. Definitely worth using to kite and move away from enemies so you can keep your distance and keep yourself healthy, alive, and safe. Stay safe out there. Use your Advanced Joggers. Next up, we have a very cool scroll called Fisher Bearpaw. Minus 50% weapon damage, but each attack hits twice. This weapon damage decrease is multiplicative, but the double attack tends to activate quite a lot of different synergies, especially elemental. Basically, this is a double of the elemental chance of any particular weapon. Obviously, this tends not to be very good if you're trying to do a large amount of damage on one instance of damage. Say you're doing something like with Energy Blade, or you're using Fatal Current with Lay Low. But in almost all other cases, Fisher Bear Paw tends to be a strict upgrade and has almost no downside. So Fisher Bear Paw tends to be exceptionally strong and definitely something to look out for. Next up, we have Merciless Combo, plus 10% weapon damage for 1 second whenever hitting the enemy, and can be stacked up to 100 times, which is a 1000% damage increase. So this tends to be very good. Any weapon that can really stack this up, like the Porcupine, the Illusion, the Lightning, Thunderclap Gloves, that kind of stuff, tends to get a lot of benefit out of Merciless Combo. It works in a lot of builds. Obviously, if you're not shooting at a lot of bullets, this tends to be quite bad. But when there are times when it is amazing, there are times when it is good, and times when you should avoid it, because it doesn't fit in your build. If you're shooting a sniper rifle, this doesn't do anything for you. Next up, we have Deadly Counter. After taking damage, all hits will become crit hits for 3 seconds. Keep in mind that you don't actually have to take damage. This is wrong. It just says, and what it really should say is, anytime an attack hits you, all hits will become crit hits for 3 seconds. And really, that's not even the case. Any damage is applied to you, whether you take the damage or not. This means that like things that do 0 damage but are an attack or are an instance of damage will trigger Deadly Counter, causing you to do crit hits for 3 seconds. This can be extremely powerful in so many situations, and it's almost never not worth picking up. Deadly Counter is one of the better combo pieces in the game, and tends to have almost no downside as well. So very strong. Gold Medal tends not to be very good on the dog, but everyone else recovers 15% max HP or armor whenever you use the primary skill or your dash. Especially dashing, healing your max shield or armor gets to be really, really good with any dash cooldowns or multiple dashes. Very, very easy to keep your max and shield armor very high with Gold Medal. Very accessible, works in almost every build, works on almost every character, tends to be very good. Next up, we have Magic Watch. Magic Watch, it might be a slightly underrated scroll here. There is a 33% chance to reset the cooldown when you use your primary skill or your dash. And this has been a very powerful scroll for me. It is a higher skill scroll. You do have to get used to recognizing when this cooldown resets and then being able to use that. But if the better you are at doing that, the better this scroll gets. And if you are good at it, this scroll gets very, very strong. Especially with chaining multiple dashes in a row, you can hear when the dash comes off cooldown. So I'm listening for that, and that allows me to maybe even dash 3 times and know that I'm able to do that instead of just spamming. And for that reason, Magic Watch, while having a high skill cap, does give you a high payoff for it when you can use it correctly. Great scroll, little hard to use, but very good. Next up, we have Elemental Relic, plus 5% elemental damage for 10 seconds whenever you kill an enemy affected by elemental effect. Now, keep in mind, we are doing a solo tier list. This is not very good for team because you have to get the kills to do it. But in solo, this tends to be very strong. It's very easy to get 1 kill every 10 seconds while doing an elemental build. That is a very low threshold to have for a scroll, and that allows you to sort of keep this going through almost an entire room relatively easily. So by the end of the room, you've got maybe 20, 30 stacks of elemental relic, because every time you get a stack, the entire cooldown is refreshed, and that allows you to do a huge amount of damage. This scroll tends to be very good if you are cognizant about keeping the stacks up. Next up, we have Penetration Bullet. Crits deal 50% damage directly to enemies' HP rather than their shield or armor. This is a very good scroll. It works in almost every situation. It tends to be better or worse on some things, but it almost has no downside. Obviously, maybe not obviously, but doing fire damage with Penetration Bullet tends to be better because fire damage is bonus damage to enemies' HP, because half of this gets applied directly to the HP. Boosting that with fire damage tends to be very strong. Penetration Bullet tends to be very, very strong. Next up, we have Dual Edge. Gain 1% damage dealt and plus 2% damage taken for each enemy you kill. This ratio makes this particularly good. I used to have dual edge, not here, but in the balanced category. But after playing it for a while, the scaling on the damage dealt really compensates for the damage taken. And because I tend to prioritize all these damage reduction talents, the actual damage taken increase isn't quite as big of a deal for someone who plays the way that I do. And for that reason, enemies tend not to get very close to me, because by the time that I'm actually by the time that they would be attacking me, I've already killed them because I have enough stacks of dual edge. This also makes most bosses a lot easier to deal with. Dual edge is probably the highest reward for the risk of the risk-reward scrolls in the game. Tends to work very well, and it has an added benefit. If you're in a position where you are taking too much damage, you can always drop the scroll just to reset the stacks, so that you're not at risk of dying from a stray bullet until you can get some damage mitigation. Against the Flow is a really uniquely designed scroll in the game. Hitting an enemy will apply an effect for 4 seconds that refills 15% rounded up to a minimum of 1 of your magazine every second. When the effect ends, you instead lose 1 random ammo type from your reserves every second. Okay, and so I think that you get how this works, and it tends to be very good. Against the Flow is great at enabling certain combos, like the no reload combos. It's not nearly as brain dead as Advanced Depot, and I would say its downside is worse because you have to sort of, if you're shooting too much, it's a problem. Against the Flow tends to be best when you're shooting just in quickly enough with a magazine that's just the right size that you never are able to shoot all the way through your magazine, and so you keep your magazine full. And for that reason, even though it does require a little bit of setup and it is a little bit of a higher skill scroll, it does have a huge payoff in the fact that you can keep from ever having to reload, and there are a lot of ascensions, inscriptions, and other things that really combine well with this particular scroll. And for that reason, it is the top of the usually very strong list category. Okay, so we are now in the broken/OP category for Gunfire Reborn, all scrolls. We are here. We are near we can see the top of the mountain from here. And at the bottom of the crest of the mountain is Propulsion Device. Dash has 3 skills, very humble, very powerful. Gaining 3 charges on your dashes is extremely strong and allows you to combo with stuff like Wind Rider and Magic Watch, because you have a higher chance of having that. There's some more here that I'm not immediately seeing, but there are plenty of things that combine very well with dashes that are sort of auxiliary to just the fact that it keeps you alive very well and allows you to get out of a dangerous situation almost guaranteed almost every time. Gold medal was what I was thinking. Combines really well with gold medal. Next up we have Heavy Shield, which is very much worth the -10 move speed, but because it gains a 50% chance to negate normal damage. So normal damage means like non-elemental, non-crit damage that is applied to you, okay? 50% chance to negate that means like most big hits from bosses have a 50% chance to do 0 damage, and most hits from enemies have a 50% chance to do 0 damage. The -10% move speed is more than worth that increased survivability, and this particular scroll tends to be extremely powerful. Next up we have Lightless Shield. Gain 3 stacks of Lightless Shield every 30 seconds, meaning you gain all 3 every 30 seconds. Each stack blocks 1 attack and is consumed upon activation. You can only have 3 stacks at any time. This scroll tends to be extremely powerful. The fact that you gain all 3 stacks every 30 seconds means that you start every room with the first 3 damage that you take being 0, and then throughout the battle you are gaining those 3 stacks again, usually somewhere in the battle, which tends to save you. And the way that tends to like sort of sort itself out is really, really good. It makes some stuff in the game basically not an issue for you. Like certain bosses basically just can't kill you at all if you play remotely well when you have Lightless Shield. And in fact, it takes a lot of nuance out of those boss fights because of how powerful it is. Obviously, certain enemies tend to do better against Lightless Shield, but Lightless Shield has the same overpowered nature that Spirit Feline does, which is that there's very few instances in the game that currently punish you with lots of little instances of damage. Most of it's like just doesn't quite happen that way, and so for that reason, Lightless Shield tends to be very strong, or it tends to be really, really strong. Next up, we have energy storage. Energy storage was one that I got a little bit of disagreement with as far as how high I placed it, but I really stand by my judgment here. Uh, Primary skill capacity increased by 1, but cooldown increased by 30 seconds and cannot be discarded. The fact that you have 2 primary skills, and primary skills tend to be one of the best ways that you survive or you do damage, depending on what you're doing, makes energy storage extremely powerful. Dual wield with energy storage is incredible. Tao's Swords Out with energy storage is incredible. Having 1 extra orb on the cat is okay, not that great. Having an extra leap is incredible. And having an extra fatal current is incredible. All of those things are extremely powerful, and for that reason, energy storage should not be overlooked. The 30% cooldown does not matter because you get to choose when you use it, and so you can save having 2 for the right time. And it's just incredibly strong. This downside is not nearly enough to justify the benefit of this. The only hero that doesn't get a huge benefit from energy storage is the cat, because he already has a way to get orbs without this downside. Next up, we have another spicy take by Slight, and that is Triple Comeback. A lot of people think Triple Comeback is not nearly as good as it is, but I stand by my personal critique that this is one of the best scrolls that you can get in the game in Solo Reincarnation 7. Because of the way that the talent tree works right now, where you have this damage prevention from overflow of your, like when your shield breaks, you prevent overflow damage, and you have the emergency defense where every like 3 minutes, I think, you gain immunity for 2 seconds upon taking lethal damage, means that these triple comebacks are much more tenacious than they may look. Despite having despite being half HP and shield, you getting all those talents, which really extends the survivability of those extra lives. And I often look at this as 1.5 free extra lives, and that is extremely powerful, and should not be overlooked. Triple comeback is top tier solo play. Next up, we have elemental power. Elemental damage is increased by 25%, but really what we care about is when triggering an elemental effect, elemental effects will be passed to a nearby random enemy. This is extremely strong no matter what you're doing, because it really makes passing elemental effects really strong. One thing to keep in mind is, so say you apply corrosion and pass that to an enemy, and then you apply fire to an enemy, and then that fire gets passed to the other enemy, it causes an explosion, right? Well, there was no damage dealt here. So one thing that elemental power does is it copies the damage that you did and applies it over here to this one too. So it has this sort of, especially with the explosion effect, this tends to be actually it works great with just about everything. This is one of the best scrolls in the game. It's amazing at applying manipulation, miasma, and explosions. It has extremely high synergy with all 3 of them, and tends to be very broken. Super, super good, super fun. Next up, we have one of my favorite scrolls in the game, Deft Hands. Shooting won't consume any ammo for the next 2 seconds when killing an enemy or destroying an item. This is a particularly skill-based scroll to use because of the destroying an item stipulation. That means that certain things like Wild Hunt, you can start by clicking down on a barrel and then go to town. And your idea is that you have to kill something every 2 seconds so that you can keep spamming Wild Hunt like a madman. Deft Hand works great with things that are not Wild Hunt, like the Aura of Venom as well, and tends to be good in every build. There's no build that's upset that it got Deft Hands. So for that reason, it tends to be very, very strong in everything. And then when it is exceptional and when it is really used, it is completely ludicrous. And it takes some skill to do that. And for that reason, I think it is extremely strong and a little broken, and so fun. And if I were to reassess this. I might put it just a little lower, maybe at the bottom of the broken OP or at the top of the usually strong. Maybe there's some wiggle room I have on deft hands, but it tends to be very, very, very strong. Next up, we have paranormality at the, we're getting to the very tip top here. Most people would disagree that paranormality isn't nearly as strong as I think it is, but with all of the ways that you gain shield in this game or armor, paranormality like makes all those things ridiculous. I mean, it makes Tal's sword guard absurd. It makes elemental grenade on the cat absurd because you're doubling all of these gains. So every time you gain max shield, well, now you're gaining double that. And it was already really good to gain those things. And so paranormality takes a lot of the survivability options of characters and just takes them into the stratosphere. And for that reason, it tends to be really overpowered. When this ascension is used correctly, where you're specifically, knowing that any max shield you get or armor you get gets doubled when you have this, then you start really doing some crazy stuff with paranormality, and it is, in my opinion, broken and overpowered. You may be surprised to see abnormal speed near the top here, but I make the case that movement speed is by far the most important commodity in the game, and the more you have, the more likely you are to win your run. So for that reason, the top two here are two of the best movement speed scrolls in the game. Abnormal speed basically gives you 30% move speed as long as you're full shield and armor, and that tends to be very, very strong. Most of the time you're not taking damage, and the more movement speed you have, the less likely you are to take damage, and that makes it self-synergistic and very, very powerful. At the top of the broken/OP, we have strategic advantage, plus 40% movement speed for 3 seconds after using a dash. Unless you have Ostrich Rider, this is 100% uptime plus 40% move speed, which is absolutely ridiculous. It is extremely good. It is all you need as far as movement speed in one scroll and tends to be very, very good. There's not much more to say about it. Movement speed is so incredibly important, and having a 100% uptime, 40% is just nothing, with no downside, besides the fact that you have to use your dash, is extremely, extremely, extremely useful in solo R7 and cannot be understated. So very, 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 very good. Necessary to be able to play R7 right now. And finally, we are in the so broken I don't use them category. You may not know this about my channel, but there are 3 Ascent scrolls that I actually refuse to use because I think they make the game too easy for me in solo R7. Urgh, big flex, right? No, I just want to have fun. I'm not trying to flex on people. The first one of those is Advanced Depot, minus 15% additive weapon damage. Additive, okay? At least that's my understanding, is that this is an additive damage decreased, which means that it is like meaningless. So basically, ignore that. This just says, use reserve ammo first rather than magazine when shooting. This has a huge amount of combos that it can go with. It takes the demon lore into the stratosphere and makes the weapon completely bonkers. It's pretty brain dead and doesn't require any like thought from the person who's using it, and activates some combos that I think should require me to think when I am activating them. And so for that reason, I think Advanced Depot is so broken that I don't use it, and I don't think it's very fun. Now, Elemental Weave, on the other hand, is absolutely busted, but I do think it's kind of fun. Elemental damage will always cause an elemental effect within 3 seconds after swapping weapons. With a little bit of time at getting used to swapping weapons, this scroll means 100% uptime on elemental effects, and using this with Miasma means that you tear through R7 like it's wet paper. It is absurdly broken. And the fact that it even has an enhanced version that's better than it is just mind-boggling. This is the second best scroll in the game for a reason, and it is available to you as a new player. So if you're looking to try to exploit one of the best scrolls in the game, start here, learn early, and you are going to skyrocket up the charts. And so it comes to this. Spirit Feline. The top scroll of my tier list, Spirit Feline, plus 100% damage taken. Oh, that sounds terrible. But damage taken from each hit will never exceed 14% of the sum of max HP and max shield plus armor. One sec. Okay, so what does that mean? All right, 14% of the sum of max HP. So that means 100% divided by 14 equals, okay, 7. All right, so that's like 7 hits before death, right? But only that's like the max. So like if it does less than that, then it doesn't matter. So really small ticks of damage don't matter. Okay, like when do I get hit 7 times in a row quickly in the game? Like almost never, except for maybe monks. And don't forget about the damage overflow reduction when your shield breaks. So this looks, it's like usually 8 to 9, somewhere in there. 8 to 9 hits before you die, and you have to get hit all in a row for it to work. If you're healing any shield or health during that time, I mean, then like if you gain 60 shield, then you just gain 2 hits. And so for that reason, once you know how to use, once you know how to use Spirit Feline, I mean, it just becomes brain dead easy. Spirit Feline is like literally 100% guaranteed win every time. And so every time I see it, I literally buy it from the peddler and then sell it, just out of pure spite. That's what I feel about this particular scroll. It's completely broken, and I think it's been broken for so long that it's actually a problem. But I'll save that rant for another time. If you're looking for an easy way to win the game, learn how to use Spirit Feline and abuse it, and you're going to have a really, really fun time. Spirit Feline really synergizes with stuff like Deadly Curse or anything that makes you take more damage, because it doesn't matter if you take more damage because the scrolls still function the same way. You're looking at 7 to 10 hits for you to die, depending on whether or not you're gaining scrolls. And it has to all happen in a very short amount of time because it's very easy to heal that shield or HP back over the course of 8 seconds. And it's pretty rare that I get hit 10 times in 8 seconds if I'm playing appropriately. So that does it. You made it through the entire scroll tier list. Let me know if you disagree with any of my choices. I know there are some spicy takes here. Let me know if this was helpful to you and that you got something out of this. And I look forward to seeing you in another installment of one of my videos. This was quite the undertaking, so I hope it was helpful. Also, don't forget to check the pin because there are going to be updates. And so when things get updates, I can't go back and just change the video. Check the pin. Come on.